Welcome to all of you and also to anyone who's joining with us through the recording. And I'll say a quick word about the course. As it's been mentioned, it is a course that's existed for a few years in different iterations. The first time I taught it, it was a lot of text because I was very excited about all the text that I found on the subject. And then I actually taught it again with a little bit less text and a little bit more practice. And I'm trying to go in that direction with this iteration of the course. So there is still abundant text, but not so abundant that it doesn't leave us time to breathe, to reflect, to practice. And when I say practice, I mean guided meditations, also time for creative writing or drawing, or whatever other creative practice that you feel moved to do based on the prompts provided. And time for sharing, time to learn from each other as well. So I hope that that will all happen. Um, Having said that, today's session is the first, and that means we have to cover a little bit of extra ground, as well as the beautiful intros, which I'm very glad we did make time for, which is very important to hear your voices and for you to begin to connect with each other. We have to explain a little bit of introductory content. What are the Sefirot and how does it fit with the Omer? I'm sure all of you have some pieces of that puzzle. Maybe some of you have most of them or all of them, but I'm sure also that we'd all benefit from putting all those pieces together. So without further ado, we'll do that. We'll dive in. We'll do the intro. My style is to come back together for discussion and comments and questions every section, any mini section. So that might be like one long source or a few shorter sources, but we will come back together. So if you have questions or comments or insights, just make a note, and within a few minutes there'll be a chance to share them, and we'll move through like that, and just keep asking anything you want to ask as we go. I'm right now, for the sake of the recording, I'm going to mute everyone, but I'd say there'll be plenty of time for unmuting. So I'll share my screen. And hopefully by magic you'll all see the handout. That works. Excellent. So a little bit of introductory content about this special time of the year. Between the second day of Pesach and the day before Shavuot, we are asked by the Torah to count this period that we've come to call the Omer. Why is it called that? Because the Omer is actually a measure, like a unit. Like we'd say in English, you would say a kilogram or a liter. It's actually a unit of volume. Sometimes it was used to mean a sheaf, as in a sheaf of barley or another grain. But sometimes it was actually a specific volume. And the offering we're talking about when we talk about the Omer offering this time of year is barley, as it says here. Barley is in the Torah, in ancient Israelite culture, barley is animal food. And we are on a journey between Pesach, where we harvest barley, we harvest the animal food, and Shavuot, when we harvest the wheat, which is what the human diet of ancient Israel is based on. So we're on a journey from animal food to human food. And that's also how the Kabbalists frame our journey in terms of consciousness, that we're on a journey in some ways from a lower place of consciousness to a higher place of consciousness. And the idea is that Shavuot is our festival of receiving the Torah, that we will be able to receive the Torah depending on our consciousness. Or another way of saying it is the Torah that we receive will be proportional to our consciousness, a reflection of our consciousness. So if we can go on this journey successfully with attention, with mindfulness, with paying attention to each day and growing with each day, the idea is we're able to receive a whole new Torah that we've never received before. So this is the quote from the Torah itself, from Vayikra, Leviticus, where it tells us to count this time. There's, and from the day on which you bring the sheaf of elevation offering, so that's the Omer, that it is waved. It's also an elevation offering here. Could also say it's an offering that you wave around. The day after the Sabbath, which we understand to mean the day after the first day of Pesach, so the second day of Pesach, you shall count off 7 weeks. They must be complete. You must count until the day after the 7th week, 50 days. Then you shall bring an offering of new grain to the Eternal. And the numbers 49 and 50 are very, very significant in Jewish mysticism. One second, I'm just going to make sure everyone's muted again so we don't have any background noise. Okay, I'll share my screen again. 1 second. Okay, so the numbers 49 and 50 are very significant especially in Jewish mysticism. Actually, these ideas go way back to at least ancient rabbinic sources, to the Talmud that I already mentioned. There's an idea in the Talmud that there are 50 gates of understanding. That is 50 levels of essentially of consciousness. It says in the Talmud, all of them were given to Moses except one. So there's essentially 49 levels of understanding that Moses attained. Moses, in our tradition, is seen as our greatest prophet and our greatest leader. And if something was worth knowing and understanding, the assumption is that Moses attained that level. But Moses didn't get that 50th level. And the 50th level, our Kabbalists tell us, is when you enter a new paradigm, you start all over again from the beginning. So you have 49 levels of consciousness where you're going up the ladder, as it were, and 50 is you get to a whole new ladder. So in the words of Rav Tzadok Cohen, a great Hasidic master and Kabbalist, he passed away, as it says there, in 1900, so late 19th century in Poland. He says the number 49 is always a complete purification. So we have these 49 days of the Omer, the 7 times 7, the 7 weeks, and it's the whole ladder. And the idea is when we get to the end of 49, as I say, we receive the Torah, we're really ready to make a paradigm shift. We're really ready to go up a whole nother level. And this is something that is, it recurs throughout our calendar, the idea that many of our festivals offer us a chance for a profound new beginning. And one of my friends put it this way very beautifully. He said that we're always simultaneously sowing the seeds for future harvests and harvesting what we've sown in the past. So Shavuot is this beautiful, amazing new beginning, and it's all where we are harvesting the fruits of what we've sown in the past, and we're also sowing the seeds for continued future growth. So our calendar keeps both things in mind. And of course, our calendar is based on agriculture, so the agricultural metaphor is very apt in every way. Now, what are the Sefirot and where do they come into all this? Well, there are 7 lower Sefirot. Well, actually, I'll just skip forward a second so you can see the map of the Tree of Life. I'm sure some of you are familiar with this. So the 7 lower ones are, if I move the screen like this, these are now the 7 lower ones. You can see those easily. The upper ones that are not on screen right now relate to upper levels of consciousness that do not fully manifest in an embodied way in this world. They relate to our thinking and our consciousness and our spiritual self, even above. But these 7 relate to our emotions and our physical experiences of reality. These things happen in this world, in other words. And we have a week on each of these, so we're going to go into each in depth. This is the Tree of Life. And when you see there's 7 of them which fully manifest in this world, and you see that we're on this 7-week journey, you can see why the Kabbalists put it all together in the way that they did. But first of all, what is a Sefirah? What are the Sefirot? Well, and then we'll talk about what the whole journey means. So first of all, the Sefirot meant different things at different times to different people. Originally, the first layer of meaning, the first mention of them is in a very old, really our oldest mystical text that we have called Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Creation. Very beautiful, esoteric, not very easy to understand book, but Rabbi Jill Hammer has made a fantastic version. If anyone's curious, should definitely check it out. She's made it relatively accessible and very beautiful, especially for people who want to do meditation and spiritual practice with it. And it's just very, very good, very, very gorgeously done. It's called Return to the Place. So that's Rabbi Jill Hammer's version of Sefer Yetzirah. So in Sefer Yetzirah, what are Sefirot? They are mythical numbers, living entities, which emerge from the divine and return to the divine, and which, together with the 22 letters of the alphabet, are used to create the universe. I'll just say that in very plain English. God makes the universe using letters and numbers. And the letters are the Hebrew letters of the alphabet, the 22 of them, the base letters. And then the Sefirot are the numbers 1 to 10, because there are 10 Sefirot. There's actually 11, because there's a little trick where one of them doubly manifest, but we always say there's 10 because we always say only 10 will manifest at the same time. So, and that goes all the way back to Sefer Yetzirah. So they are mystical numbers. And that some of you may have some experience with this idea from maths or philosophy, but a number, we use numbers all the time to do mundane things like tell the time and see how much things cost and buy and sell things. But a number is also a very, very pure expression of an idea. It's actually, in a certain way, the closest thing to a pure reality. Meaning, let me put it this way, you could plot reality, you could depict reality in numbers. right? Numbers are one way you could explain, describe all of reality. So the numbers, which are the original way of seeing the Sefirot, are not just common numbers. They're numbers which are the building blocks of creation. Next, the idea of a Sephirah develops in Kabbalistic texts. In this text called Sefer HaBahir, they are emanations, aspects or attributes of the divine. In other words, God's character traits that we may emulate and which map onto our own spiritual and physiological beings. So that's pretty familiar if you've already done work with the Omer and the Sefirot, then that's like, you know, what it's based on really. That's where this idea begins to be recognizable to us. But it's not systematic yet. And Sefer Bahir, that it's really all over the place in terms of what the different Sefirot relate to and how we are supposed to work with them. And then you get the third step, which is the Zohar, when it becomes a lot more systematic. Still a little bit unpredictable and not completely systematized, but much, much more. And as well as being character traits there and attributes of God, we see the idea there that, as it says here, the Sefirot are also openings, channels, gates, vessels for divine flow into this world through which God emanates stage by stage. And just to give a quick metaphor to help illustrate that point, this is brought by one of the later Kabbalists, Rav Moshe Cordovero, one of the great Kabbalists of Safat in the north of Israel in the 1500s. He says a great metaphor, a great way to understand this is colored windows. You have white light that comes, say, from the sun, like pure light that has no particular color to it. But then you have colored windows that change the quality of the light. And depending on the color of the window that you receive the light through, that will change your experience of it. And it's a very good way of explaining it because the Sefirot, the Kabbalists say they all relate to a specific color, also to a specific note in the musical scale. So we're talking about something that has its own electromagnetic frequency and its own emotional frequency as well. So that's all really ideas that the Kabbalists develop building on the Zohar. And we have Daniel Matt here who says this about them. Daniel Matt is an amazing author, Kabbalist. He translated the whole Zohar, almost all of it himself, with some other people too. And he wrote this very, very helpful guide called The Essential Kabbalah, which I highly recommend, which has a lot of great sources in it. And he says there about the Sefirot, from a human perspective, the Sefirot appear to possess a multiple and independent existence. Ultimately, however, all of them are one. The true reality is the infinite. This is very, very important. Back to the metaphor of the colored light coming through the different colored windows. If I'm in a room that, say, is all red windows, or one side red and one side another color, and I'm on the red side, I might think that that has an independent existence, that redness is a creation unto itself. But ultimately, it's very, very important. The Kabbalists really emphasize to remember there's a source. There's a source of light that everything is coming from. And the red light and all the other colors of light are just part of the picture. Carry on, he says, from above to below, the Sefirot depict the drama of emanation, the transition from Ein Sof, that means the endless one, the infinite one. That's what the Kabbalists call God. So from the infinite one, the Ein Sof, to creation. So from above to below, the Sefirot, the tree of life, is a way of saying this is how God manifests or emanates in the world. These are the stages through which God manifests in the world. God, the flow of divine energy goes through these stages in order to meet us here in the world. That's one way of looking at it, from above to below. And from below to above, he continues, the Sefirot constitute a ladder of ascent back to the one. So when you work with the Sefirot, we can also start at the bottom, as it were, and work up from there to the Ein Sof eventually. So it's a ladder that works both ways, up and down. Once inside, the Sefirot become a map of consciousness, you're right. So in other words, when we consider the Sefirot exist inside us and they reflect what's going on inside us, then they're a map of consciousness. They're a map of what we need to work on in our inner work. He says the mythical imagery of the Sefirot is stunning. The Kabbalists continually insist that these figures of speech should not be taken literally. They are organic symbols of a spiritual reality beyond comprehension. In other words, there's so many metaphors at play, and so many allegories and symbols, analogies. The Kabbalists really insist over and over again, don't forget it's all just different ways that the one, the infinite one, the divine, God, the angel, whatever you want to call it, it's just different ways that that manifests. So never lose sight of that. If you want to stay within the worldview of the Kabbalists, we have to understand everything else is just ways of beginning to understand different aspects of God, to never lose sight of that unity. Let's come back together and to see if anyone has any questions or comments or insights to share on what we've shared already. And it's fine, no pressure either way. If you do, you do. And if you don't, it's okay too. Cheryl, please.
You mentioned, I thought you said a book, Return to the Place, and I didn't catch the rabbi that wrote it that you referenced.
Sure, it's Rabbi Jill Hammer.
Thank you.
Yeah, highly recommended. Gorgeous. Very special book.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for asking. Laurie, please.
Thanks, Robert Daniel. So this is maybe not that relevant, but I'm distracted by it. The idea of going from one ladder to the next, is there a target for how many ladders and where it ends? Or is it just the idea that we're always growing, always learning?
Huh. It's a great question. It's more the latter. It's more that here's a beautiful way they put it. What one of the Hasidic masters said, this is brought down in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, I believe, if I remember right. It says, why did Moses die when he got to 120? And the answer given is because he couldn't grow anymore in this world with this body. He'd gone through as many levels of learning and as many ladders as he could, and he'd reached the human limit. So it was time to move on. So that's the ideal, to keep growing. That's it. That's how we see what it means to be human, essentially.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Sharon, please.
Okay. My question is, it seems like, I don't know, the Sefirot is like a life force. But what I was wondering was, does a Sefirot, I know people talk about them that like they're in humans, but are Sefirot in the universe? Are they in like other things? Like, just, do they exist around us besides just inside of us?
Great question. So first of all, to reiterate that principle that we can only say they exist in as much as they all exist connected to the Ein Sof. Like there's no such thing as a independent Sefirah floating around on its own. It's always part of the entire tree of life, connected to the source of life. That I want to emphasize that. Having said that, yes, they're in everything. Meaning for the Kabbalists, this is a map of the human being and the infinite and everything in between, because we are created in the image of God, as the Torah says right at the beginning. Human beings are created in the image of God, but we are also a microcosm of the universe, according to ancient rabbinic sources that the Kabbalists take very literally. So yes, this dynamic is at play in everything.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. Andy, please.
Yeah, what you said about not taking these literally, that they're all just different ways the Ein Sof manifests. I'm taking a class with Yiska Smith, and I can't remember the source, but we were talking about something called imageless thought, which is kind of somebody asked about the ultimate goal, and I'm wondering if the ultimate goal is this imageless thought, which is where the specifics and the details of all this fall away, and you get to kind of the ultimate reality, which is imageless.
That sounds possibly like it might correlate to the very highest Sefirah, which is so high that the Kabbalists say you can't even call it a Sefirah. It's like halfway between a Sefirah and the divine, which is called Keter, crown. So that sounds like that might be one way of describing that state, that emanation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Sandy. Sandy, please.
Right. So when Moses reached the highest awareness while on earth, you said that some of the Kabbalists believe that's why he couldn't live anymore. So is that a mainstream mystic interpretation as to why he didn't go in? Or is it just some of the mystics?
Um, I don't think it's a common teaching. From what
Mhm.
I only remember seeing it in one place. But it does speak to this idea that what we're here to do is to grow. And if there's nowhere further that we can grow, then it's over. That's kind of the idea they're driving at there. Yeah, but I think it's not such a prevalent teaching as far as I know.
Did Moses know that? Did
Did Moses
Moses?
know that? It's a
I know
wow,
that.
it's a great question. I mean, he begged in the Midrash. It says he begged not to be taken. He loved life and wanted to carry on. Yeah, I wonder. Maybe maybe he didn't. But maybe. Hmm, I'll chew on
Thank
that.
you. I know that's a tough one.
No, it's good. I'll chew on that. Thank you, Sandy. Sarah, please.
Yeah, I guess I was struck when you mentioned that Omer is a measure and that we're starting with Chesed and that Midot are also is measure. And was there an association then in this measuring?
Oh, interesting. Okay. So when the Torah first mentions the Omer, and it means a very literal measurement, as you say. And the Midot also, it literally means the measure. But the Kabbalists say they actually they do make the connection there. Um, the Kabbalists say that I've seen this in a few places. They say that one way of understanding the fact that the Sefirot are sometimes called midot, which is that. Sorry, I just should say that explicitly. Sefirot are also called midot. What's a midah? A midah is a character trait, but also means a measure. Literally, it's what Sarah's asking about. So why are they called a measure? Well, the Kabbalists say that one way of understanding them is that they are a way that the divine uh, essentially emanates into the world in the right measure, like the right degree or the right amount, you could say, of energy in the right way coming into the world. So yeah, that's one way. It's those double meanings are put together sometimes.
So then how we manifest that measure is our Sefirot going up the ladder?
Right. That's yeah, beautiful. That's our journey towards the divine. Yeah, it's reciprocal. There's a lot of reciprocity there. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, thanks everyone. I'll share my screen again and we'll carry on. Wonderful questions and sharings. Yeah, okay. So a very important teacher of Kabbalah is Rabbi Isaac Luria, who this is from him. He's probably the greatest Kabbalist of his era and maybe still towers over Kabbalah, really, even into our time, from Sfat in northern Israel, I mentioned before, in the 1500s. And he didn't write anything down, but lucky for us, his student did, Rav Chaim Vital. So you'll see that their brief bios here if you want to refer to those. And this is a key teaching for us about what everything we've been talking about so far has to do with this period of time and our work. So he lays it out pretty clearly for us. He says, during these 49 days, talking about obviously these 49 days where we are right now, it is good for a person to intend to repair all that they have wronged in relation to the 7 Sefirot. For example, during the first week, they should intend to repair whatever they have wronged or damaged in relation to the Sefirah of Chesed, loving oneness or loving kindness. In the second week, they should intend to repair whatever they have wronged or damaged in relation to the Sefirah of Gevurah, severity, strength, boundaries, and so on through the 7 weeks. So this is where the practice comes from in terms of this is where it's written down for the first time this clearly. It's an idea that's present before, certainly in the Zohar, we see the idea. And the Zohar may be based on teachings which were not written down previously, but which were present in our people's tradition and practice, orally, but this is the first time, as I say, it's written this clearly in about the 1500s. So that's where our practice right now, can find its most concrete roots. And this we've already seen, the tree of life, which we'll refer to over and over again. You don't have to know it off by heart, then don't worry. But I expect during the course of our course, it will become more familiar and we will refer to it. Just a little bit more introductory material, and then we'll move on specifically to Chesed. This is from the Tikkun Zohar, which is essentially additions to the Zohar from roughly the same period, 13th and 14th century. It's a little bit after the actual Zohar emerged. And it begins with Elijah speaking, Elijah the prophet. And he says, Master of worlds, you who are one, unfathomable, you who are above all those above, transcendent from all that is above, no thought can grasp you at all. And he carries on, you from whom emanate 10 healings, called the 10 Sefirot, to guide worlds, both hidden and revealed. So the 10 healings, it's a beautiful way of thinking about the 10 Sefirot. I'm highlighting here the Aramaic. You could also translate that as 10 repairings. Some of you might recognize that the root here is the same as tikkun olam, fixing, l'taken. So the 10 fixings, repairings, or healings, that's another way of thinking about what the Sefirot are. And he goes on to say, actually, I'll read the next paragraph. It's very beautiful. He says, and in them you are concealed from humans. You are bound up in them, unified in them, and because you are within them, anyone who separates any one of these 10 from their fellows is considered as if they have separated from you. That's a very important paragraph, actually. And in them, you are concealed from humans. So the Sefirot are kind of like clothes, garb, disguise, costume for God. They're not the essence of God, but of course, they allow God to manifest in this world. We without clothes, we can't go outside onto the street and manifest in public. So God can't manifest in this world naked, as it were. So God needs the Sefirot. This goes back to that idea of the Midot, the Sefirot being measurements, ways in which God can manifest in this world in an appropriate way. So, and the second point of this paragraph I just read, you are bound up in them, unified in them, and because you are within them, anyone who separates any of these 10 from their fellows is considered as if they have separated from you. So this is a warning that occurs over and over again throughout Kabbalah, that you might have a strong experience or strong connection with one of the Sefirot on any given day. You might really connect with the energy of Chesed or whichever other one, and you might be tempted to essentially turn it into some kind of form of idolatry by forgetting that it's just part of the way that the oneness manifests. So that's the warning that we see over and over again, right? That to remember they're all connected and they're all part of a oneness. And then finally, final paragraph is very important because it maps the Sefirot onto our bodies. So Chesed, loving oneness, is the right arm. That's where we're starting today. Gevurah, severity, is the left arm. Tiferet, compassion, harmony, also truth, is the trunk of the body. Netzach, triumph, and Hod, humility, are the two thighs, right and left. And Yesod, foundation, is the completion of the body, the sign of the Holy Covenant. Malchut, manifestation, is the mouth, which we call the oral Torah. Malchut is also sometimes in many texts is also the womb for people who have a womb. We'll go through, we're going to spend a whole week on each of those. So, we'll go into detail about, what that means. We're not going to do, because we have so much intro material and we want to spend time on Chesed, we're not going to do this practice now. I'm just bringing your attention to it. You got a whole practice sheet already about what to do on each day of the week of Chesed, and also those of you doing the course for next week as well for the week of Gevurah. But there are also going to be these practices on the sheet. Sometimes we'll have time to do them, sometimes we won't, that you can do in your own time if you want. This one takes you through all 7 of the Sefirot, so you can begin to get to know them and begin to get to know how you experience the tree of life in your body as a way of preparing and getting into the practice. Let's come back together and just check if there's any questions or comments on what we've seen, and then we are ready for Chesed. Gil, your hand, please.
Yeah. So Raf Luria's tikkun that he refers to, is there, just thinking, because we're just over Nisan, you're going towards the end of Nisan, and is there any some connection between the tikkun that takes place on Rosh Chodesh, Nisan, which we link back to, you know, Gan Eden and the break, the break that happened there. Is there a connection in that?
Whenever the Kabbalists use the word tikkun, they're always using it in the context of repairing the universe. Tikkun olam, you know, the original Kabbalistic meaning of tikkun olam is definitely connected to fixing everything all the way back to Eden and kind of renewing our world as a new Gan Eden. That's their vision. Thank you. Anna Bracha, please.
I hope I'm getting this right, but what's impressing me as someone who has late onset Judaism is how many opportunities or how many practices throughout the calendar year, the Jewish calendar year, we have to unify and return to teshuvah and unification. And this is preparing us to receive the Torah so that we're all one, as one. And I'm picturing our ancestors in the desert having to grow up. And so in order to be ready to actually really receive it, and we have to do that all the time because we're human and we make mistakes. That is so, is that the right, I mean, is that on the right track for?
1,000%. Actually, I'm really grateful you mentioned that original context because I should have, and I think it's really important. So, did you want to say anything else, or can I? I want to add something to what you said really beautifully because it's so important to remember. The original context is the people are slaves. Not only are they currently slaves, but they've been institutionalized into slavery for hundreds of years. So they come out suddenly into the desert, and of course, just because you leave slavery physically doesn't mean you are actually psychologically or spiritually able to be a free person. So that's very much part of what this period is about. It's kind of Ruckus bringing our attention to is a journey from, you know, the leaving the place of narrowness, of constriction, the Mitzrayim, the slavery, but actually, like, how do you become free enough? The rabbis say that receiving the Torah, to really receive the Torah, is the ultimate freedom, because they say you know, to receive it fully as you need to receive it is the ultimate act of freedom, and to be in relationship through the Torah in the right way is the ultimate act of freedom. So how do we go from being institutionalized slaves into that? Well, that's it, Chanukah. It's those 49 steps are kind of our map where we go through that every year.
There's so many chances for us to return to our best selves. And I'm thinking about how in the womb we knew all the Torah, and it's these are all remembering who we are supposed to be. I love it. Thank you.
I love that teaching. Thank you. That's very beautiful. Kitty, please.
I just wanted to draw out a little bit something that you've already mentioned, because, you know, we're working with images, and we're working so often with two-dimensional diagrams like the tree of life, or you know, the maze, the spiral, you know, going in or coming out. And because of that, I think it's sometimes so easy to forget how dynamic this is. And so, and I mean, I'm sure we'll be getting into this as we get into, you know, the specific Sefirot. But some situations require more of one thing, or more of one attitude or one approach, which means, you know, like there's a constant realignment of the flow, because there's flow, you know, between all of, I mean, I'm thinking of that famous diagram where all the Sefirot are linked, and, you know, we're getting into a very multi-dimensional image there. So I just wanted to highlight just how dynamic it is, because it's so easy to think of it as static, like Chesed, Gvura, but it's always about the interaction among the various different modalities.
Kitty, very, very good point. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's very, very important to say. You know, we in a sense, we didn't even begin the journey yet in terms of, looking at the individual Sefirot, but I think that's really important what you said in terms of a frame. That yeah, it's a dance. It's truly a dance. As Benji Elson has a wonderful book called The Dance of the Omer, some of you may know. That it's truly a dance of these different qualities back and forth and how we live them. As you say, sometimes we need more of this and more of that. Absolutely. Thank you. Brilliant. Okay, let's move on to Chesed. Thanks everyone for what you're sharing. This is great. Okay, so Shari Ora, a Kabbalistic work from around the time that the Zohar emerged, from Rav Yosef Gikatilia. And he says the meaning of Chesed, again, I translate Chesed, it's usually translated as loving kindness, but I translate it as loving oneness for reasons that we'll see in the course of this session. The meaning of Chesed is any action which is not compelled by the side of din. Din is judgment or severity. Din is actually another name for Gevurah, which has the second week of the Omer. So we'll have a whole session on din. So the meaning of Chesed is basically, all he's told us so far is Chesed is the opposite of din. It's the opposite of Gevurah. Any action which is not compelled by the side of din, but rather which one does with desire and will without any compulsion. Desire and will. When one does something with this grace or goodness, this is called chesed, and it is the opposite of something done through compulsion. So doing good because you want to do the good. He's going to say more about this. The divine aspect of El, as a divine name called El, Aleph Lamed, I just highlighted here in the Hebrew view. So that divine name relates to chesed. The divine aspect of El preceded the world. And the blessed God created the world with chesed, and not from any kind of lack whatsoever. Meaning God didn't create the world because God needed to, because God was missing something. God is perfect. That's the Kabbalists, and for that matter, also the philosophers like Maimonides all agree on that. The Ein Sof, the Infinite One, is so perfect, it doesn't need anything, but chooses to create the world. Rather, as he says here, rather he created the world with absolute chesed, to do goodness for his creations, and to give them a portion and an inheritance according to his abundant rachamim, compassion, and chesed. Now, rachamim, compassion, is actually another name for tiferet, which we will get to in our third week. It goes chesed, then gevurah, and then you have a healthy synthesis of chesed and gevurah makes tiferet, which is also called rachamim. So chesed and rachamim, though, are very often bedfellows, very often interchanged almost, because they're both seen as these like positive giving qualities on the same side of the tree of life, the right side, the giving side, the masculine side. And whereas the feminine side is called the side of receiving or severity. That's how the Kabbalists call it. Obviously, very colored by their own gender. And hence it is said, he says, I said, this is a verse from Psalms, I said, Chesed will build the world. Olam Chesed Yebaneh. The world is built with Chesed, as this beautiful song version of this is you may have heard from Rabbi Nachum Creditor says so beautifully. The world is built with Chesed. We can build the world with Chesed, and this Chesed that builds the world, he's stressing, is not something that is done from any place of lack or need, but just what we might call generosity, a desire to give and benefit. Now, we'll see a little bit more about how this manifests in our work at this time and in general. Something here from the Breslover Hasidic tradition. This is from the great student of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, who we're going to see a teaching from soon. This is from Reb Nosson or Reb Natan of Breslov. And he says, the essence of leaving Mitzrayim, Egypt, or constriction, the essence of leaving Mitzrayim was the quality of, and he quotes a verse from Ezekiel, when I passed by you and saw you wallowing in your blood. This is not a very nice verse. It's not very polite, but it is quoted in the Haggadah, and it's very central to how the entire tradition sees the Exodus. So what has this verse got to do with the Exodus? He's going to tell us his interpretation. He says, this means that Israel were filthy, in inverted commas, because we were at the 49th level of impurity, as is known, and the blessed eternal one was compassionate towards us and found in us good points, even among the strong impurity of Mitzrayim, which overcame them. So actually for this, I think I need to come back together so I can see you and you can see more clearly. So I want to explain that this whole system of the 49 levels of purity and impurity, it needs, okay, mute everyone again.
We
One
will.
sec.
I know.
Okay, everyone's muted. Great. Okay, so 49 levels of purity and impurity. The Kabbalists, and actually goes back even before the Kabbalists, say that when the Israelites were slaves in Egypt, they were about to disappear. They were about to no longer exist as Jews because they were almost completely assimilated spiritually into their surroundings. And the way they say this is, remember I said before there were 49 levels of consciousness that the rabbi said Moses attained, and if the 50th he couldn't quite get to. And in this world, you just start all over again. So they say it's also the same. You have your 49 positive levels, but you also have 49 negative levels. And they say that the Israelites won the 49th level, negative level of what they call the levels of impurity. Meaning, again, like they were almost completely lost, because the 50th is like wiping out when you're surfing. You're gone. You're finished. In other words, they wouldn't have known that they were Israelites anymore. They would just totally not existed as a people. So the rabbis say what happened on Seder night, on the night of the Exodus itself, was that God took the people from negative 49, minus 49, all the way up to plus 49. So actually 98 steps in between, right? The 49 from negative 49 to 0, and then from 0 to plus 49. So 98 steps. And we got this enormous boost. And that's how they actually describe what happens to us on Seder night, that we get this enormous boost, crazy miracles all happen in one night. We get lifted up on eagle's wings, metaphorically, but all these other things actually happen. But then they say we go back down to 0. Like that was just for the purposes of actually getting us out of slavery, out of Mitzrayim. But then we go back to 0. And one way of understanding Omer, and this is another way of understanding what Chana Bracha shared before about the journey from Mitzrayim to getting the Torah, is we're trying to recover the levels that we actually did have a taste of on Seder night. And one way this is sometimes depicted is treasure. Imagine someone gives you a huge treasure chest, and you get to just look at it, and you're told, yeah, this is all for you, but then it's actually taken away from you, and then you have to earn each piece of it individually over the next 49 days. So you do get to get it back, but only if you actually do the work each day for each piece to integrate each level and each piece of it. Whereas on Seder night, it was all just a free gift. Like you can just have it all right now and enjoy it, but then it's taken away. We actually get to keep it permanently if we do the work of each day of the Omer. So we were on, just to go back to the teaching, I'll share my screen again to see how this relates to the teaching. We were on the 49th level, but God had compassion on us and found goodness in us and therefore brought us out. So this is something that's emphasized a lot in Kabbalah, that we weren't taken out of Egypt because of our merits, because we were so great, because at that point we didn't have so many merits. God had compassion on us and saw the good in us and therefore did all this goodness for us. And now we're on this journey of trying to integrate all these amazing gifts into our lives, beginning with the kindness that God has shown to us, that we're going to try and emulate that and do it for others. Okay, let's pause there and see if anyone has questions or comments on that. Barbara, please.
Yes. I want to ask about the shadow side of Chesed, because that does involve compulsion. There is compulsion with that. That's what makes it the shadow side. So would you speak to that, please?
Yeah, well, brilliant question. So what the source, Rav G. Katila in Shariori, who was saying there's no compulsion in Chesed, he's talking about divine Chesed. In other words, healthy Chesed. But your question is so important, Barbara, because is related to what Kitty shared before also about how dynamic all these qualities are and how we have to work with them as being so dynamic. Any excess, any imbalance of any of these qualities is going to manifest as unhealthy, harmful, damaging behavior. And actually, just to give an example, building on Barbara's question here, Chesed is used in a very surprising way in the Torah. In one place, the word Chesed is actually used to describe incest. In other words, love, which doesn't have a sufficient sense of boundaries. And the Baal Shem Tov talked about this many times, about how even our chesed, our desire to be kind and express kindness in the world and goodness in the world, has to have the healthy boundaries. And by the way, boundaries is the sibling quality of chesed, which is gevura, which we said is its opposite, which we're getting to next week in the second week of the Omer. So it's all about these interrelations and this dance of having the right amount at the right time. And sometimes you need more of this and more of that, as Kitty said. So that's very much our work when we're trying to bring these qualities into our life.
Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. Kitty, please.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question. My mind works quite diagrammatically, and I'm trying to overlay different diagrams. So I'm just wondering whether any of the Kabbalists did an interplay between the 49 steps or levels and the 40 years. We have 40, we have 49.
The years I haven't seen, but very, very related, because you're talking about the 40 years in the wilderness, correct?
Yes.
So the Torah says that the Israelites made 42 journeys in the wilderness, and the Kabbalists say actually it was 49. It's just that some of them, they double back on themselves. So there are lots of teachings connecting the journeys of the Israelites, which I feel that's what you're asking about, right? The journeys of the Israelites in the wilderness and these 49 stages. And just to add another layer to that, they also relate to the Torah portions. In the Torah itself, there are 53 portions, but we often double up many of them. So it relates to our journey of through the Torah cycle through the year as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. And Laurie, please.
Thank you. I don't want to be a question hog, but there are two concepts you've brought that I've never heard associated with this journey before. And I was just wondering if you could help me kind of get grounded in it. Is the assumption that we're all, what is impurity? I guess you've mentioned it so many times. Is it the assumption that we're born impure, or are we born at 49? And then, with full Torah just before we come out, and then what? And so maybe you can help, because the idea of impurity to me, it's kind of foreign. So I want to bring it into this process as much as you want us to have it in this process. And the second question is about, well, maybe I'll stop there.
Laurie, I would say actually, what was just mentioned very recently, I think by Barbara, if I remember correctly, the shadow is how I understand it. It's about behavior which isn't healthy, constructive, life-creating, life-affirming, damaging, essentially in some way. That's how I understand it, and that's ultimately how Kabbalah understands it. It's behavior which destroys life rather than and then disconnects life from its source rather than connects and creates ultimately.
Okay, then I think I'll let it sit as a semantic resistance, because I think impurity accuses the soul in a way, where I think we're talking about behaviors that can be grown and developed, think and then do and then feel, or because the second concept you've brought in, Rabbi Daniel, is this idea of repair as part of the Omer. I've never heard that before. And it reminds me of Yom Kippur. And I wonder, and in line with impurity and such, are we to be seeking forgiveness of ourselves and others as part of repair during the Omer? Like, is there at the end some kind of judgment or measure? Not that there's an end, but so these are new concepts. I wondered if you can just help me. Thank you so much.
Sure. Great questions. It's definitely a journey of repair. There isn't an explicit focus, as we do find in the time of Elul and Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, about seeking forgiveness and that kind of thing. But I would say if we're growing with these qualities, then that inevitably is part of it. If I'm becoming more whole in all these different aspects, then part of that's going to be realizing where I've been lacking and trying to make it better and trying to repair it. And we are just looking at the calendar. So Pesach is on the 15th of Nisan. That's exactly 6 months before the first day of Sukkot. So 5th Nisan, Seder night is the full moon. Another way of saying this is Seder night is the full moon closest to the spring equinox. And the first night of Sukkot, day of Sukkot, is the full moon closest to the autumn equinox. So these are clearly parallel symmetrical points in our calendar. And we are on a journey now where every day between these 2 points is counted. Because not only the Omer is counted, we have 49 days between now and Shavuot. Shavuot's on the 50th day. But from Shavuot until Yom Kippur, every day is counted, because the Torah tells us the whole story with the golden calf and everything that happens there, and of repair, and what you're asking about is repair and teshuvah and return and forgiveness. That is a process which takes a specific number of days, which takes us exactly from Shavuot to Yom Kippur. It's 120 days. It's 3 groups of 40 days. So we are in a section of our calendar where literally you can plot a clear course of like the work that we're supposed to be doing, and it's taking us to Yom Kippur ultimately, and then to Sukkot, which is like the after party for Yom Kippur essentially. Thank you for the question, Cheryl, please.
I don't know if this is relevant, so I respect the fact if you don't want to answer this, but I'm still stuck on like, I know that numbers are very important in Judaism, and then you were calling out earlier in the class about how they're a very pure expression of an idea, and I think you said they're the closest to reality, and I think it's because they're just factual, 1 is 1 and 2 is 2, et cetera, et cetera. But we're always talking about the infinite, so I'm still stuck on, well, why are numbers so important if there's, why 49 levels if they're, up and down, if there's really, an infinity way of being, if that makes any sense.
Makes a lot of sense, Cheryl. It's a great question. And actually, it's a question worth asking. A great answer is found in Nachmanides Ramban, not be confused with Rambam, right? Very easy to confuse them. They even lived at roughly the same time. Nachmanides has a beautiful commentary on the Torah, and he comments on the section we saw, the verse about the Omer. He says, we can't explain it or understand it, but our mystical understanding that he received from his teachers in Kabbalah, he's a Kabbalist, is that this world is built on sevens. That we have 7 days of the week and 7 years in the sabbatical cycle of agriculture and so on. And that's the nature of our reality as the Kabbalists understand it. So, maybe God could have done it in 8s or 9s or 10s, but according to the Kabbalists, that's how God did it, is essentially the answer. And then, 10 is obviously, 3 is also a special number, 10 is also a special number, 5, and, every number is special in its own way.
Yeah.
But these numbers they have, when we say 7 is a building block of reality, it has certain qualities that we maybe take for granted, we don't even notice because we're in that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Richard, please.
My battery might go, but I'll try to get it in. The Zohar focuses, from my limited experience, on the union or unification of the Holy Blessed One and the Shekinah, the 2 aspects of God. And do you have any, are you able to relate our journey on the 49 days of the Sefirot, the Omer, to making a contribution to that unification of the divine?
Beautiful question.
Wow.
Right. I'm actually very, very grateful for the question. The Zohar is a beautiful love story and description of how the different aspects of God, the Sefirot, are separated from each other, they're alienated, and because they exist in a broken universe that has been broken partly because God wanted it that way to make it hard and interesting for us, and so we need suffering and injustice and challenge, but also that we have made even more broken. So we have made these qualities even more alienated from each other, and our job, as Richard alluded to, is to unify them, and especially Tiferet, which is, we'll get to it in the 3rd week, which is sometimes called the Holy Blessed One, and Shekhinah, which is also sometimes called Malchut, which is in the final week. In other words, we can understand those as Tiferet is also compassion, and is also the transcendent aspect of the divine, and Shekhinah is also, and Malchut is also manifest reality as we have it in this world. So all the work we're doing with all these different emotions and character traits and trying to get them in the right dance and dynamic and balance is ultimately trying to do, according to the Zohar, as Richard's saying, to create a unity in creation, to create a way that they can come together healthily. And the Zohar's imagery is explicitly sexual. That, we're talking about a a consummation of a relationship between different forces of reality. And that's happening inside us all the time, if we're getting it right. Whenever we say or do anything that has the quality of bringing compassion and life into the world in its optimal way, we're being channels for that to happen through us. Thanks for the question. Brilliant. Okay, let's continue. I'll share my screen again. Very grateful for all these wonderful sharings and questions. So we're going to see a teaching now from Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, famous and great Hasidic master, also the great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, who started the Hasidic movement. And he's going to build on, even though he's had the orders in reverse, but he's going to talk about these good points. In fact, really the teaching we saw before was building on this. The good points within us that I just want to remind us, because we've talked about a few other subjects since then, what Reb Nosson, the student of Rabbi Nachman, said in the previous source was, he said, God didn't have to take us out of Egypt. We didn't deserve it, essentially, but God found in us good points. In other words, God showed kindness, showed chesed towards us. He chose to try and see the good in us and then did something kind for us. So this is the origin of that idea of these good points that he's riffing off. And it's a very famous, very classic Torah. And if it's your first time coming to it, then it's also, very, very powerful introduction to the world of Rabbi Nachman and this whole way of looking at things. So he says, know that you must judge all people favorably. That's actually from the Mishnah, from Ethics of the Fathers, Pirkei Avot. Know that you must judge all people favorably. And he adds, this applies even to the worst of people. You must search until you find some little bit of good in them. In that good place inside them, they are not bad. If you can find just this little bit of good and judge them favorably, you really can elevate them and swing the scales of judgment in their favor. Then they will be able to return to their best selves and to the divine in teshuvah. So this is what God did for us when we were in Egypt. God chose to see the good in us and chose to look at us in such a way that not only did God feel differently about us, we actually, our state actually changed. And we can do this for others. We look at people better. We look at people differently. It doesn't just change the way we feel about them. It actually changes their actual state. We can actually affect reality by our glance, by the way we look at things. Maybe they are an evil person, he continues. Even so, is it really possible that they are totally devoid of even the slightest modicum of good? How could it be that all their life they never once did anything good? By finding one tiny good point in which they are not evil, and thereby judging them favorably, you really do raise them from being guilty to having merit, until through this they return in teshuvah. So one technique sometimes said by the Kabbalist, Rav Moshe Cordovero, a great Kabbalist I mentioned before, he says one way we can do this is imagine someone as a baby, a tiny, innocent baby, suckling on their mother's breast to get their milk. They're innocent, they're perfect, they never did anything wrong. This person may have done something very bad to you later in life. You may find it very hard to forgive them or see the good in them now. But once upon a time, that they were in that state of perfection and beauty and innocence. Just to skip forward a little bit, he says, you must also find the good in yourself. So the practice was to find the good in people by looking at people in a certain way and then changing their state through doing that. He says we have to also do this for ourselves. When you start looking inside yourself, you may think you have no good in you at all. You may think you are full of mistakes, and the negative voice inside you tries to make you fall into a bitter and black despair, God forbid. And even when you start examining a good deed you did, you may see that it had many flaws and it lacks wholeness, meaning you see that even the mitzvah, commandment or connection, or holy deed that you merited doing is itself comprised of impure motives, external thoughts, and numerous thoughts. So I'm trying to see the good in myself, he's saying, and I find one thing I did that was okay, that maybe was good, but then I have this inner critical voice that's telling me it wasn't so good, I did it for the wrong reasons, etc., right? Nevertheless, he says, how is it possible that this mitzvah or holy deed contains not even a little bit of good? In any case, despite the above-mentioned flaws, there must have been some good point in the mitzvah or good deed you did. So he doesn't say the flaws are not there. The flaws are there. You have an ego. I have an ego. Everyone has an ego. We all have ulterior motives, and we all have, things which make our deeds not completely perfect. But nonetheless, he says, if we really keep digging, then we can find that tiny point, maybe if it is tiny, maybe it will grow of actual goodness that motivated that good thing we did. He says you must search and search until you find some small good point inside yourself to enliven yourself and make yourself joyful. When you discover the good that is still in you, you genuinely move from being in spiritual debt to having merit. And then you can return into Shuvah to your best self and the divine. So it's a good example, actually, relating to Laurie's question before of how working on these qualities is in itself, part of the path of Teshuvah. You should search for and gather good points in others and ourselves, and through this, melodies are made. So this is a very beautiful idea that when we're trying to see the good in ourselves and others, we're creating music. We are making the melodies of the music of life by trying to connect with that goodness. So we have a practice on this, and I'm just thinking, I think it's important to do. And I think there are two other aspects of Chesed to touch on that are also really important to touch on. So I think with your permission, let's do a little bit more text, and hopefully we'll have time for the practice at the end. I think is probably the best way to do it, just to make sure we don't leave out these other important aspects of Chesed. So bear with me if you're looking forward to some practice. As I said at the beginning, because we had the intro, both the intros to each other and then the intro section of Sefirot, there's more to get through in this class than normally. So normally we'll have a bit more spaciousness and practice and a bit less text. So one other really important aspect of Chesed is that the Kabbalists, especially the Zohar, relate it to Abraham. They relate it to Abraham Avinu, our father, our patriarch Abraham. And there's this moment in Genesis which they say is like such a archetypal moment of Chesed, of him embodying Chesed and bringing Chesed into the world. We're going to read that now and see how it's understood in the tradition. So they say, actually, there's two aspects of Abraham we're going to see. The first one is the more straightforward one in some ways. So the eternal God appeared to him, Abraham, by the terebinth of Mamre, the plain of Mamre. He was sitting at the entrance of the tent as the day grew hot. Looking up, he saw three figures standing near him. Perceiving this, he ran from the entrance of the tent to greet them, and bowing to the ground, he said, "My lords, if it please you, do not go on past your servant." So Abraham sitting by the entrance of his tent. The tradition says that his tent was open on all sides and that he did that on purpose so that he could see people coming from all directions. And he's sitting there in the heat of the day, and he's sitting there. The tradition says he's recovering from the operation he performed on himself of circumcising himself, and he's in immense pain. And yet all he wants to do is to welcome guests, strangers traveling the desert, people who are idol worshippers, who do not share his beliefs and his culture. He wants to welcome them into his tent and feed them and do kindness for them. And he's desperate to do it. When he sees these people on the horizon, who turn out to be angels, but he doesn't know that yet, he runs towards them, even though he's in enormous physical discomfort. The Talmud, our ancient rabbis say, commenting on this, Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, welcoming guests is greater than receiving the face of the Shekhinah, the divine presence, God, as it is written. And Abraham said, "My lords, if it please you, do not go on." Now, what are they referring to? Well, if we go back to our verses that we just read in Genesis and Bereshit, it says that God appeared to Abraham. In other words, he was having an experience of intimacy with the divine. He was having a vision, a moment, an experience of being in the divine bliss. But then he looks up and sees three people coming, and he runs to meet them, meaning he says to God, "I'm sorry, I have to interrupt this very important divine moment because I have a mitzvah to do. I have this amazing thing I need to do that's more important." The rabbis say from this that welcoming guests, doing this mitzvah, is more important than intimate communion with the divine. And many explanations of this. One of them is that, well, through welcoming guests, that will be an even better way to have communion with the divine, right? Rather than like me blissing out on my own, I can connect with God whatever you want to call it, through God's children, through God as God manifests through humanity. Right? That's one way we can understand this. So that's one very important aspect of Chesed. This need, this desire to do kindness that is so powerful that it overrides whatever else is going on. And again, we've said before, but it's worth saying again, ultimately we want Chesed in healthy relationship and balance with all the other qualities. But there's something about Abraham that is, in this moment, kind of pure, unbridled Chesed, right? He just can't bear not to do it. But there's another aspect of Chesed too, which also explains why Abraham did what he did and speaks to that, which is very beautiful and powerful. This is a midrash, an ancient rabbinic text I love very much. So just a little bit of background here. Some of you may be familiar with the story of Abraham breaking the idols. The full story, I'll tell it briefly, is Abraham's dad owns an idol shop, Terach. That's what he does. He makes and sells idols. And Terach says to Abraham, who's a kid, I want you to watch the shop while I go out. And Terach comes back, and all of the idols are smashed except one who has a hammer in his hand. And Abraham says to his dad, yeah, it wasn't me. It was the idols had a fight, and this one, they were all fighting, and this one was the last man standing. So all the idols smashed each other, and this one was the one that was left. This idol smashed up all the others, essentially. And Terach, Abraham's dad, says, idols don't move. They can't smash each other up. They can't do this. And Abraham says, exactly, Dad. I wish you could hear what your ears could hear what your mouth is saying. And then, unfortunately, because Abraham is rebelling against the theology of the culture he's in, but which is also connected to the politics, he gets taken to Nimrod, who's the local tribal chief, king, strongman, who is important. It's important to Nimrod that everyone worships the gods that he tells them to. Like the idols are part of his way of dominating and oppressing the people and enforcing his own power. So Nimrod says to Abraham, this is where we catch up in the story here. Nimrod said to Abraham, let us worship fire. And then Abraham says in the Midrash, let's rather bow down to water that quenches fire. So Nimrod starts off saying, fire is obviously the strongest thing. Let's worship fire, you and me, Abraham. Since you're someone who's obviously concerned with truth, fire must be the ultimate. But Abraham says, no, water quenches fire. Water can put out fire. So we should bow to water. Nimrod says, okay, very well. Bow down to water. Abraham says, let's rather bow down to a cloud that is filled with water. Then Nimrod said, then bow down to a cloud. Abraham says, perhaps I should bow down to the wind, which scatters the cloud. Nimrod says, then bow down to the wind. Abraham says, if so, let us worship humans who can withstand the wind, meaning, a wind won't blow us over. Nimrod then says, you are playing word games with me. I bow down to nothing but fire, and I am about to cast you into the midst of it. Let the God to whom you bow down come and save you. And that's exactly what happens in the Midrash. Nimrod and his guards throw Abraham into the fire, and God saves Abraham, and he walks right out again. That's the story. That's like it's not in the Torah itself, but this is like the backstory to who he is when we meet him in the Torah. So what's this got to do with welcoming guests and the quality of Chesed? Well, this is why I translate Chesed as loving oneness, right? Abraham, the archetype of Chesed, is the one who says, fire, water, cloud, people, wind, all these different things, they are all just manifestations of the one, right? None of them on their own is the ultimate. None of them on their own is the creator of the universe, is the source of life. And he is someone who is dedicated to finding and connecting with that source. In fact, he's the person who brought that into the world, right? He's the father of ethical monotheism. He's the first person in our tradition, in our part of the world, to say there is a oneness that we are in relationship with, right? So that's how these things fit together. Because if you believe there is a oneness we're in relationship with, of course, when I see strangers in the desert who are obviously creations from the same oneness that I am, they are my siblings. Why? Of course, I want to welcome them into my tent, right? Of course, I'm desperate to do that because I believe it's everything connected. A very, very nice way of seeing this in language. Let's just come back together for this. Very nice way of seeing this in language is the word kind in English. It's related to the word. So actually, it has a double meaning and it's still in English, right? I am kind to someone, right? But also things are of the same kind. Right? It's related to the word kin also, right? So kindness and things being of the same kind and things being kin or related, this meaning is also there in Chesed. Like we want to do Chesed for people because we recognize the inherent unity of creation, right? It's not like, oh, I should do, I must do, I'm made to feel bad or whatever. You know, it's like, of course, everything is one and I'm part of that oneness. Let's pause. Does anyone have any questions or comments on that before we move on? Sharon, please.
Okay, so I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a minute, if that's okay.
Please.
So I've heard that story about Abraham being the father, but now I'm arguing with myself and thinking there must have been this, I've heard this somewhere. There must have been others, people at that time who also, like, I'm just thinking maybe it was a concept that was beginning to unfold in the universe at that time, and he was manifesting and speaking it, but he wasn't the only one. That's what I'm wondering right now.
Sharon, honestly, I have no objection to that at all. I wasn't there. I don't know. But let me frame it how I understand it, which is just like, this is the story that we have about how it came into the world. You know, and I don't think, for what it's worth, for me anyway, the Torah doesn't claim to be history in the way that, you know, the Greeks really invented the concept of history as something, you know, that like definitely happened in the way, you know, in a certain time in a certain place. The Torah doesn't really have that idea of history that you know, everything happened literally in the way that it said it did. So yeah, I'm very comfortable with the idea, as you say, that it was coming into the world at that time, and this is a way that we have of understanding some of that process partially. But it doesn't yeah, I don't need this to be the complete story of it or anything like that. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. We have a few minutes left to do some practice. Let's take that time to do that. It's short, but still always worthwhile to do that. So please make yourself comfortable. We'll do the practice on finding the good points in ourselves. And this is a practice we can also do for other people, but we'll do this for ourselves. And you'll see on the sheet, there's also an embodied meditation of Chesed and some other sources, but we did the main things. So let's make ourselves comfortable. Do this practice for 4 minutes. Bring your attention inside yourself when you're ready to. If you're comfortable closing your eyes, feel free to do so. And we're going to try and think of a time when we did something that expressed the goodness in us, the good point that Rabbi Nachum was talking about, the Nekudat Tova. And see if, as he says, we can really appreciate, feel, and dwell on and expand that good point by appreciating it. Can we feel it growing more and more? And as he says, we may encounter resistance to doing this. We may find parts of ourselves that don't make this so easy, and that's fine. We want to welcome everything with compassion, as he does in his teaching, and say that's all just part of being human. Let's have a couple of moments of silence, a couple of minutes of silence while we try and remember this good thing we did and try and really feel the goodness in us that motivated it. And keep striving and digging and trying to feel it more and more. And let's gradually bring this round of practice to a close for now. It was very, very brief, just so we can come back together, share a goodbye together. And then, of course, I invite everyone to continue the practice in your own time, either right now or later when you can. So first of all, I just want to say thank you to everyone for your presence, for your joining, for the wonderful questions and comments and sharings. It's very lovely to be together, and I'm very excited for this journey. I actually usually begin courses with Shechianu, the bracha for arriving at this point in life with gratitude and for going forward, and I forgot to at the beginning of today's one, so Shechianu. I think we made a really wonderful beginning, and thank you to the Source of Life for this opportunity. And if anyone has any last things you want to share, we have a minute more together. If anyone wants to squeeze in a last word, you're welcome to.
Rabbi Daniel, at the risk of revealing myself as a fangirl, do you have a rap that we can rap with? I mean, rap with.
You know, I don't, only because it's too long. But maybe I'll find a way to share it at some point during the course. There's a rap about the journey of the Omer that came down to me, I think last year, if I remember right. That I really, really, I would love to share it at some point. So yeah, thank you for asking. I'll try and find a way to do that. Thanks, Laurie. Chana bracha, please.
Well, thank you, Shireen, for your question, because it's the first time I actually understood the story of Abraham, that he was an exemplar with his welcoming the strangels, the stranger angels, and having that open heart, even though he had no idea who they were. And that, in my meditation, that's what I brought inside me, was the model, the exemplar of that welcoming goodness. That was just beautiful, and the question helped me so much.
Chana bracha, thank you. That's a beautiful way to close. That openness, that chesed, that way of manifesting chesed. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And everyone will be sent the recording and all the relevant sheets and everything. If you didn't add my email to your contacts, please do. Otherwise, it will go to your spam folder probably. So please do that. And see, I hope, many of you next week. Have a wonderful week. Shabbat Shalom when it comes. Chag Sameach too, for that matter. And to be continued.